In this section, we're going to look at units of measure, unit of measure classes, and conversions. You define units of measure for tracking, moving, storing, and counting items. There's a couple of examples where you have a dozen bottles or a liter. You can have different unit of measure classes, and within a class, you have different units of measure. So count, or it could be quantity. Length is going to be measuring the length of something. Time, volume, mass, area, weight are all options for different unit of measure classes. Each unit of measure class is going to have a base unit of measure, which is generally going to be the lowest one, or smallest one you transact, and is also what you do your conversions with. So if you, for example, are looking at time, smallest unit you're going to measure is seconds. So if you're going to do 1 minute, it's going to be 60 seconds, and then it goes from there. And if you need to, you can use the REST services. There's an API to create units of measure with standard conversions. You can also do item-specific inter or intra-class conversions and intra-class conversions, which is between two classes. You'll see units of measure used in inventory, product information management, or product management, product hub, depending on how you've deployed that, order management, planning, global order promising. It is used a lot of different areas. Here's an example. So in this first unit of measure class, just call it quantity, but now it's count. Base unit of measure is unit, which we used to use each, whatever makes good business sense in your world. But then to convert a unit into a dozen, which would be 12, a gross, which would be 144. So within the class, these are standard conversions. Same thing with mass. If you start with milligrams, you go to pounds and kilograms. It's generally always the same time. Those don't change. Volume, those don't change. Where it gets interesting is where you start going between classes. So you may have an item like we have an example of a keyboard, which we generally count as a unit, but we also want to track the weight. So 1 unit is 2 pounds. Pretty heavy keyboard at any rate. And eggs, so a dozen eggs or a container of eggs is 12 light bulbs. A box of them is 24 in this example. My favorite example is what weighs more, a ton of steel or a ton of feathers? Well, they both weigh a ton, but when you go load them on a truck, the volume is very different. The steel, the volume of that is much lower than the volume of a ton of feathers. So that's going to give you a good visual there. So here we have another example where we have a gross of units, which is 144, a metric ton of mass. Base unit is milligram. It's a lot of zeros there to count. And we used time earlier, seconds to minutes. You can automate the unit measure conversion setup with packaging strings. So when you define an item, if it is something that you need to track eaches, but it also goes in the boxes, cases, pallets, you can create that packaging string, to speed up the transaction process. When users go to do transactions, if there's a case or a pallet, they can just identify that, and the system will say, oh, that's going to be X number of eaches. You do need to enable the calculate runtime transaction unit measure conversion with generated item data for that to work. Here's an example. So we have nitrile gloves sold in boxes of 100. There's 5 boxes per pack, and there's 4 packs per carton. I think they did that to make the math easier. Generally, when you have boxes, they're even numbers, but not odd, but it makes math easier. So you can do the transaction of a box, which is 100 each, pack, which is 500 each, carton, which is 2,000 each. So the system will automatically do the transactions. Additionally, you can see all of the transactions, all the different units of measure. Just click on the icon for the unit of measure conversions. A little window will pop open and you can see all of the conversions. And you can drill into the interclass conversions to see what's what. You can also define the default stocking unit of measure. So if you have the example I like to use is you have a distribution warehouse. In one part of it, you may have pallets. Next door, you may have cases, then break those down into eaches. Here's an example where in Seattle, you have 10 cases. In the stores, you have 5 boxes, and then the primary unit of measure is eaches. It's really flexible, and it allows you to manage the different units of measure to make your life easier. You can also stock dual units of measure. You can price and invoice in dual units of measure, very popular in process manufacturing, and where you have things where the specific weight of something may vary from lot to lot or package to package. If you think about chickens, they're not always exactly the same size, but you may want to count the number of packages, the number of packages that go into a case, but you want to charge your customer based on the weight of what you're sending because they want to pay for the weight of the chicken, not the packaging. So it gives you that ability through the order to cash process, procure to pay process, manufacturing process. You can track the dual units of measure, and it'll go through inventory, order management, pricing, supply chain orchestration, financial orchestration, costing, procurement,